Ahmadou had been preparing Ibrahim Traoré's meals for 3 years as his trusted chef, until that night when he was caught and confessed who had given him the assassination order. The presidential kitchen in Ouagadougou's Kosiam Palace hummed with its usual evening activity as Ahmadou Sankara began preparing what he believed would be President Ibrahim Traoré's final meal. The irony of his surname, sharing the name of Burkina Faso's legendary revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara, was not lost on him as he carefully measured the colorless, odorless powder that would soon end the life of Africa's most defiant president. Ahmadou's hands trembled slightly as he stirred the deadly substance into Traoré's favorite dish, thiboudian, the West African rice and fish meal that had become a comfort food for the young president during stressful times. The trembling wasn't from fear of being caught. The security protocols he'd observed for 3 years told him exactly when and how to avoid the kitchen cameras. The trembling came from the weight of what he was about to do to a man who had treated him like family. For 3 years, Ahmadou had been more than just the presidential chef. He was one of the few people allowed unrestricted access to Traoré's private quarters, someone who knew the president's eating habits, his food preferences, even his weaknesses for certain desserts that reminded him of his childhood. Traoré had personally hired Ahmadou, not just for his culinary skills, but because he came from the same village as Traoré's late mother, creating a bond of trust that went beyond professional duty. That trust was about to be betrayed for $5 million, more money than Ahmadou could have earned in 50 lifetimes as a chef. The offer had come 3 weeks earlier, during what seemed like a routine grocery shopping trip to Ouagadougou's central market. A well-dressed woman approached him near the spice vendors, speaking in perfect Moor, the local language that immediately put Ahmadou at ease. "You are Ahmadou Sankara, the president's chef," she had said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Ahmadou nodded cautiously. His position was not exactly secret, but it wasn't something he advertised either. "My employers have a proposition for you," the woman continued, her voice calm and businesslike. $5 million, transferred to any account you specify, anywhere in the world. All you have to do is add a small amount of powder to one of the president's meals. The sum was so astronomical that Ahmadou initially thought he was being pranked. $5 million was more than Burkina Faso's entire presidential budget for kitchen operations over 10 years. "What kind of powder?" he had asked, his curiosity overcoming his caution. "Something that will make him very sick for a few days." "Nothing permanent, just enough to keep him out of an important meeting next week." The lie was smooth and convincing. Make the president sick, prevent him from attending some diplomatic function, earn more money than most people could imagine. It seemed almost too easy. But as Ahmadou now stood in the presidential kitchen, preparing to administer what he had been told was a mild illness-inducing agent, he was beginning to suspect that his contact had not been entirely truthful about the powder's effects. The substance had arrived 2 days earlier, delivered by a different courier to Ahmadou's modest apartment in Ouagadougou's Tampoui neighborhood. Along with the powder came detailed instructions: when to use it, how much to use, and most importantly, how to ensure that Traoré consumed the entire portion without becoming suspicious. The instructions were far too sophisticated for something meant to cause a temporary illness. They included timing charts, metabolic calculations, and specific guidance on masking the substance's minimal taste and texture changes. This was the work of professional assassins, not pranksters trying to disrupt a diplomatic meeting. Ahmadou had spent the last 48 hours wrestling with his conscience. On one hand, $5 million would transform not just his life, but the lives of his extended family. His elderly parents could receive proper medical care. His children could attend university abroad. He could buy land, build homes, establish businesses that would provide for generations. On the other hand, Ibrahim Traoré had been genuinely kind to him. Unlike previous presidents who treated staff as invisible servants, Traoré often asked about Ahmadou's family, remembered his children's names, and had even attended Ahmadou's father's funeral the previous year. This wasn't just professional betrayal, it was personal treachery against someone who had shown him genuine human kindness. As Ahmadou finished stirring the poison into the thiboudian, he made a decision that would change the course of African history. Instead of serving the poisoned meal immediately, he covered the plate and set it aside. Then he prepared a second, identical plate of thibudian using the same ingredients but without the deadly additive. This clean plate he placed on the serving tray that would go to the president's dining room. His plan was simple: serve the clean meal to Traoré, then dispose of the poisoned plate and claim that he had completed his assignment. He would collect the $5 million and try to live with his conscience, having taken the money without actually committing murder. But as Ahmadou prepared to carry the clean meal to the dining room, he was startled by a voice behind him. "Interesting technique you have there, Ahmadou." He spun around to see Colonel Matthew Ouedraogo, head of presidential security, standing in the kitchen doorway with 2 armed guards. The colonel's expression was calm, but unmistakably dangerous. "Colonel Ouedraogo," Ahmadou stammered, "I was just finishing the president's dinner." "Yes, I can see that. But I'm curious about the covered plate you set aside, the one you prepared first." Ahmadou's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on avoiding the obvious security cameras that he hadn't considered the possibility of hidden surveillance or human observers. Colonel Ouedraogo stepped closer, his voice remaining conversational despite the gravity of the situation. "You see, Ahmadou, we've been watching you for the past week, ever since our intelligence services intercepted communications indicating that someone in the presidential household had been compromised." The room seemed to spin around Ahmadou as the full scope of his predicament became clear. Not only had he been caught in the act of attempted assassination, but his handlers had likely been under surveillance as well. "The woman who approached you at the market," Colonel Ouedraogo continued, "works for French intelligence services. The courier who delivered the poison to your apartment works for a private military contractor funded by several European governments. Did you really think that trying to kill the president of Burkina Faso would be a simple cash transaction?" Ahmadou's legs gave out, and he sank into a chair beside the kitchen preparation table. The magnitude of what he had almost done, and what he had gotten himself involved in, was overwhelming. "Colonel, I didn't go through with it," he said weakly, gesturing toward the clean plate on the serving tray. "The president's meal is safe. I prepared a clean version." "We know," Colonel Ouedraogo replied. "We've been monitoring the entire kitchen through hidden cameras for the past 72 hours. We watched you prepare both plates. We saw your internal struggle, and we saw you make the right choice at the last moment." One of the guards stepped forward and carefully collected the covered plate containing the poisoned thibudian, handling it with gloves and placing it in a secure container for later analysis. "The question now," Colonel Ouedraogo said, taking a seat across from Ahmadou, "is whether you're going to help us track down the people who tried to turn you into an assassin, or whether you're going to protect them and face trial for attempted murder of a head of state." The choice was stark and obvious. Ahmadou spent the next 2 hours providing every detail he could remember about his recruitment, the payments, the delivery methods, and the instructions he had received. The information he provided would prove crucial in exposing what investigators would later determine was a multinational conspiracy to eliminate Ibrahim Traoré. The poisoning attempt was not an isolated incident, but part of a coordinated campaign involving French intelligence services, European Union operatives, and mercenary organizations funded by multinational corporations whose African operations had been disrupted by Traoré's independence policies. Within 48 hours of Ahmadou's confession, Burkina Faso's intelligence services had arrested the market contact, the courier, and 3 other individuals involved in the assassination plot. More importantly, they had gained access to communications that revealed similar attempts being planned against other African leaders who had challenged Western economic dominance. The evidence Ahmadou provided led to one of the largest diplomatic scandals in modern African history. Phone intercepts and financial records showed that the assassination attempt had been coordinated from the French embassy in Ouagadougou, with direct involvement from officials in Paris. President Traoré's response was swift and decisive. Within a week, all French diplomatic personnel were expelled from Burkina Faso. French military bases in the region were ordered to cease operations. Most significantly, Traoré shared the evidence of the assassination plot with other African leaders, triggering a continent-wide investigation into Western intelligence operations. The revelation that Western powers were actively attempting to assassinate African presidents who challenged their economic interests galvanized African public opinion in ways that no amount of diplomatic protests could have achieved. Street demonstrations in support of Traoré erupted across West Africa. Other African presidents who had been considering accommodation with Western demands instead moved toward more confrontational policies. For Ahmadou, the consequences were complex. While he avoided prosecution for attempted murder by cooperating fully with the investigation, he could never return to his position as presidential chef. The betrayal of trust, even though incomplete, had permanently damaged his relationship with Traoré's administration. However, Traoré's response to Ahmadou's situation revealed the president's character in ways that surprised many observers. Rather than seeking revenge or harsh punishment, Traoré arranged for Ahmadou to receive counseling and job training, eventually helping him establish a small restaurant in Ouagadougou that specialized in traditional Burkinabe cuisine. Ahmadou made a mistake, Traoré explained to his advisors, who questioned this merciful approach. But when the moment came to choose between money and morality, he chose correctly. That counts for something. The poisoning attempt became a turning point in Traoré's presidency. The evidence of Western assassination plots provided him with moral authority that transcended Africa's borders. International media coverage of the incident portrayed Traoré not as a radical troublemaker, but as a legitimate leader defending himself against illegal murder attempts by former colonial powers. 6 months after the incident, Ahmadou was interviewed by African Union investigators compiling a comprehensive report on Western interference in African affairs. His testimony, along with evidence from similar incidents in other countries, formed the basis for a formal complaint filed with the International Court of Justice. "They told me it was just to make him sick," Ahmadou said during the interview, his voice heavy with regret. "But when I saw the detailed instructions, the precise measurements, the timing charts, I knew this was meant to kill. I realized I was being used to murder someone who had only shown me kindness." The AU investigators asked Ahmadou why he ultimately decided not to go through with the poisoning. "President Traoré came to my father's funeral," Ahmadou replied simply. "He sat with our family, shared our grief, treated us with respect. How could I kill someone who had shown such humanity? No amount of money is worth betraying that kind of trust." The attempted poisoning of Ibrahim Traoré became a catalyst for what historians would later call the African Awakening, a continent-wide recognition that Western powers were willing to use extreme measures, including assassination, to maintain their economic dominance over Africa. The incident also established new security protocols across African governments. Presidential protection services began coordinating intelligence sharing to identify potential assassination attempts. Kitchen staff, drivers, bodyguards, and other close-access personnel began receiving enhanced background checks and psychological evaluations. Most importantly, the revelation that African presidents were facing assassination attempts for challenging Western economic interests transformed the continental political conversation. Leaders who had previously been cautious about confronting former colonial powers found themselves with strong public support for more assertive policies. A year after the incident, at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Traoré reflected on how close Africa had come to losing another revolutionary leader to foreign assassination. "They have been killing our leaders for 60 years, he told the assembled presidents and prime ministers. Lumumba, Sankara, Gaddafi, all eliminated when they threatened Western economic interests. The attempt on my life was just the latest example of how far they will go to maintain their control over our resources." The speech received a standing ovation and led to the establishment of a continental early warning system for threats against African leaders. It also resulted in a mutual defense agreement stipulating that any assassination attempt against one African head of state would be considered an attack against all African nations. For Ahmadou, the experience had been traumatic but ultimately transformative. The small restaurant he established with Traoré's assistance became successful, and he became an advocate for youth employment and education programs. His story was often cited as an example of how foreign powers exploited economic desperation to turn Africans against their own leaders. In interviews years later, Ahmadou would reflect on the moment when he chose not to serve the poisoned meal. "I learned that some choices define who you are as a person. I could have become rich by committing murder, or I could remain poor but keep my humanity. I chose humanity, and I've never regretted it." The poisoning plot that failed to kill Ibrahim Traoré instead strengthened his position immeasurably. The revelation that Western powers were resorting to assassination attempts provided African leaders with undeniable evidence of the extremes to which former colonial powers would go to maintain their dominance. The incident marked the beginning of a new era in African-Western relations, one in which African leaders understood that their independence efforts might literally be matters of life and death. That understanding, paradoxically, made them more willing to take risks in pursuit of genuine sovereignty. The kitchen in Kosium Palace, where Ahmadou had wrestled with his conscience that crucial evening, was renovated and expanded as part of enhanced security measures. But a small plaque was installed near the preparation area, bearing a simple inscription. "Conscience is the voice that everyone can hear, but only the brave obey." It served as a daily reminder that sometimes the most important battles for African independence are fought not on international stages or in diplomatic meetings, but in the quiet moments when individuals must choose between personal gain and moral principle. In Ahmadou's case, that choice had helped save not just a president's life, but a continent's future.